What would it cost you to live or move to Forsyth, Georgia? Mischa Thompson here, your favorite Warner Robins real estate agent with The Real Broker, and today we're going to talk about the cost of living in Forsyth, Georgia. This little town in Monroe County gained a lot of popularity over the last 2 years due to increased home prices and expenses in the city of Atlanta, and Forsyth only being an hour drive away. And on top of that, a lot of people started working remotely, so they didn't have to be in Atlanta and the suburbs around where it's way more expensive. So Forsyth seemed to be a good place, and we're gonna check out if that is actually true. Before we start with the numbers and the cost of living in Forsyth, I want to give you a little bit more information about the city itself. Forsyth is a very old city, founded in 1828. That's a long time ago. And they do their best to preserve the city history with all the historical buildings. So if you ever visit Forsyth downtown, you see all those historical buildings. Pretty neat to see. And it's awesome that the city is trying to keep that history up as good as possible. According to the census in 2015, Forsyth had a population of about 4,200 and a couple. That is not much. Forsyth is a small town, and I'm pretty sure over the last 2 years that increased quite a bit because they started building like crazy. Like pretty much everywhere they started building. But in Forsyth, I've personally seen a lot of neighborhoods with huge lots in super nice houses. And an awesome thing about Forsyth is it is sheltered from the hustle and bustle of the metro Atlanta area as well as Macon, and you're pretty much in between both of them, and that makes it a great place to be because you don't have that hectic lifestyle you probably have in Atlanta with all the traffic. And we all know Atlanta has one of the worst traffic problems in all of the US. So Forsyth, if you work remotely or you only have to go to work like once a month and drive the hour up to Atlanta, might be a perfect place for you to look into. And when it comes to ratings, Forsyth is actually ranked number 6 of the best cities in the greater Macon area to raise a family in, according to niche.com. So if you're looking for a great place to be for your family and work remotely without the traffic and hustle and bustle of the metro Atlanta area or Macon, Forsyth might be the place for you. As I mentioned, with the cost increase in the metro Atlanta area, which got enormous compared to other places. And yes, I know inflation and we have cost increase everywhere, but in some places we do have it more than in others. So it made sense for a lot of people to move further south since they can work from home anyway, and Forsyth is way cheaper when it comes to cost of living. But let's get into the actual cost of living in Forsyth. When we look at the cost of living, one big factor is the housing, and the housing prices have increased everywhere. In some places more, in some places less. But when we look at Forsyth, we're looking at a median home price of $357,000, while in Atlanta in general, that is not including Marietta, Buckhead, Woodstock, and all the other suburbs, it is $418,000, which is a $70,000 difference when it comes to purchasing a home. And if you look at the housing difference in Forsyth and Atlanta, it's not only the price, but what you get for the price. If you look at houses in Forsyth, you probably get a bigger home with more land than you would get in Atlanta. You're a little bit more secluded, but that's what a lot of people want nowadays. But of course, the housing is not the only factor when it comes to the cost of living. There are utilities, there are transportation fees that include gas, car insurance, and registration fees, as well as groceries and the healthcare. Those are all very important factors when looking into moving somewhere and figuring out how much it would cost your family or yourself to move to a different city. Let's move on with the groceries then, because that is one very important thing as well. I mean, everyone needs to eat and you need to feed your family, and if it's ultra expensive, you might not get the quality food you should for your family. And when we look at the national average, which is set at 100, Georgia in general, the state, is a little bit cheaper at 95.5. So let's say you buy $100 of grocery nationwide would cost you $100 average. In Georgia, it would cost you $95.50. So it would be $4.50 cheaper than the national average. And when we look at Forsyth, it is a little bit cheaper than the Georgia average. It is 95.3. So over a longer period of time, that is a lot. And yes, $100 won't get you far anywhere in the US. It's just a reference point. If we look at a family of 4, you are probably looking more at $400 every 2 weeks, probably. But if we take those $400 every 2 weeks, you would save around $18 every 2 weeks, $36 a month in groceries when living in Georgia or in Forsyth in general, and that adds up to $432 a year. So over time, when it comes to groceries, you can save a bunch of money when moving to Forsyth. Another very important cost of living is healthcare, and it's probably one of the more expensive items on the cost of living list in general. But we're taking the national average of 100 as a reference point, and Georgia's average in healthcare cost is 95.5. And when it comes to Forsyth, we are a little bit cheaper, 2.4 points cheaper than the Georgia average, and 6.9 points cheaper than the national average at 93.1. So it's quite a bit cheaper when it comes to healthcare in Forsyth compared to Georgia in general and to the national average. I know I already mentioned housing, buying, renting, and Forsyth being cheaper, but I think I forgot a number that actually puts in perspective how much cheaper Forsyth is when it comes to housing. And compared to the national average, Forsyth is 31.9% cheaper and even 12.6% cheaper than the Georgia average when it comes to purchasing or renting a home. That is an enormous difference. But let's move on to the utilities, which is another expense that everyone has monthly. I mean, we need electricity, we need water, sewer, we need internet for sure. Nowadays, you need it, especially someone who works remote. And when it comes to the utilities, Georgia in general is a little bit more expensive by 3.2% than the national average. And Forsyth is a little cheaper than the Georgia average, but it's still above the national average by 0.8%. And one reason for that is the Georgia weather, and we in Georgia having the AC running a lot. Not just a little bit, we have the AC running in the summer a lot. We got to keep the humidity out of the house. We got to keep the heat out of the house. And that is one of the biggest cost factors when it comes to utility is literally the electricity. And water is not cheap either, depending where you are. For example, here in the Warner Robins area, Perry's water is way more expensive than Warner Robins' water, even though they're just like 5 miles apart from each other, which is really strange. But I think electricity is the biggest factor when it comes to utilities here in Georgia because the AC is running so much here compared to other states. And I think when we look at the cost of living in every state where the weather is warmer, longer warmer, and hot and humid, we're gonna have above average utility cost as well. Look at Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, maybe California. Not for sure California, but they all have higher utility costs than, for example, the Midwest or northern parts, just because the AC is running so much. When it comes to transportation cost, which is gasoline, car insurance, car registration, and by the way, car insurance is important. Don't drive without car insurance. I mean, you don't do yourself a favor and the people around you, and it's illegal. But car insurance, gasoline, registration, and public transportation, which there is not much public transportation in Forsyth compared to Atlanta. If you need public transportation like MARTA or anything like that, you might need to stay in Atlanta. But when it comes to gasoline, car insurance, and car registration in general, Forsyth is 10% cheaper than the national average. And you know what? The state of Georgia is actually 5% more expensive when it comes to transportation costs than the national average. So for that, Forsyth is actually 15 13% cheaper in transportation costs when it comes to transportation, gasoline, car insurance, car registration, and half public transportation. So overall, Forsyth is 12.5% cheaper to live in than a national average. Yes, there are probably communities that are even cheaper than Forsyth in the whole United States or even in Georgia, but are they as cool and close to Atlanta as Forsyth? Probably not. And Forsyth gained so much in popularity over the last 2 years due to the remote work and the increased cost of living in the city of Atlanta. So therefore, I broke it down for you. That is the cost of living, and Forsyth is a whooping 13% cheaper than a national average to live in, and you're still close to a major city. So if you are looking to move, or if you did move to Forsyth in the last 2 years, put that in the comments below. I want to know what your factors or your moving reasons were to move to Forsyth. If you like it or if you don't like it, put that in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. If you are moving out of Forsyth, let me know as well. And if you're looking to purchase or sell a home in Forsyth, my contact information is in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.